How's it going, man?
So, have you ever been to like an arcade as a kid? Like, I'm not talking about like the big ones, like the small mom and pop arcade machines, like Pac-Man, and Galactica, maybe. Any of those?
Yeah, so we had one back in the day in where I grew up in Los Angeles. It was right by an old theater. I went there often as a kid. It was pretty cool. It had the games we're talking about, Galactica, Pac-Man, just the classics, really retro. Unfortunately, now it's gone, which kind of dawns on the reality that is the our arcades dying. Like,
100%. And for you, so I'd like to say welcome you guys. This is a new podcast that me and my friend here we wanted to try doing. We're just going to talk about things that we may have noticed, seen, or want to talk about. For this one, I decided it'd be an interesting thing to start off with arcades because we're both huge gamers. I think I'm the bigger gamer though because I've been
oh
playing
yeah,
nonstop. But it's been a really important part, just going to those like arcades in this sense. Because back then, we didn't have like the PCs or like we had consoles, but like they were kind of like rare and far between. And there was something really cool about going to a place where their whole thing was games, but like in these cool arcade cabinets. Like that was their thing. And it was so cool. And it's like a whole nother world, basically. And you can get something similar from arcades now, but there's something very special about a normal arcade with just arcade cabinets, joysticks, all those fun stuff. Maybe like a DDR because you can't escape that. But it brings up the good point that arcades are either changing or being wiped out completely. Because, well, I mean, the pandemic probably didn't help, but a lot of people probably now they just want to sit down on their laptop and play, or not laptop, unless you're poor like me, their PCs and play, right? But before, I mean, all of it was so much better back then. Well, I say that technically, but arcades aren't completely gone. Cause there was a place that me and my friend used to go all the time. Remember, Chris? It was called what was it called? Dave and Buster's. It was it was a fun time. They had a bunch of these cool newer games, but the the atmosphere was different because one, it also had like a bar and food place, which kind of changed things up dramatically, surprisingly. Right? Like you would have
yeah,
instead of just
like
people wanting to game and just have fun, a lot of people there were insanely drunk.
and
Like
just hogging up all the games. I've always considered Dave and Buster's a just a restaurant. It doesn't have the feeling of an arcade
exactly,
to it. It
exactly.
it changed it. Like, it may have gotten the concept of an arcade down, but it interpreted it very differently.
Right, because it does have the arcade games, but something about it just feels off because most people are there just for the food or the beer or the drinks or whatever. I
Exactly.
mean,
And I think a big part of the reason why arcades are dying out is we just live in the age of technology where nowadays you don't have to go down the street to the local arcade to play games. You can literally play them on your phone, your laptop, on your TV. Times are changing.
yeah, because like, why would you? And also, I guess because like for example, let's go way back in time where an arcade was like 25 cents. I think that was before our time though, to be honest. But people would go there and they'd play an arcade game for like 25 cents. If they're really good, they can play the entire game in that 25 cents. But most people, they would have to spend constantly 25 cents, right, to play. Where now get times you can pay most instances like $60 and you can play it as many times as you want, right? So I think
Exactly.
at that point the cost value comes into factor because yeah, you would have to go down to your local arcade, which might be like a block or two away versus your living room or your very bedroom, and then you would have to pay constant money to keep the game going or just kind of watch people play it on the sidelines, which then once YouTube became a thing, kind of took that away because then now you can just type in Google, be like, what do I want to see? Pac-Man gameplay. boom, you got like 100,000 results in this 1 second.
Exactly. Or
But then
but
but there was
also
something real about being there though that you don't see anymore. Because yeah, we can go to Dave and Buster's, we can go to like any of the arcades nowadays, but the machines aren't the same. Because sure, some arcade games weren't maybe fair, but not to the level today. Today, those arcade games, they feel like it's it's less subtle that they want your money to keep playing. Because some of those games
exactly.
don't work well, and they know it for a reason. So you can keep, in Dave and Buster's case, swiping your card to put more tokens into the machine so you can play. And something about that just feels wrong to me. Like,
Exactly. I think another reason why arcades are dying out is back then, when arcades, they're just mostly single player games. You put in your quarter or swipe your card and you just play a few rounds. But nowadays, a lot of people are just playing online. They want to go head to head with somebody across the world just to prove that they are better than them, even though they've never met this person.
I mean, true,
It,
but
the
from what I
idea of
heard,
gaming has changed.
right. But to that extent, from what I heard in Japan, they still have like arcades with those type of things where you can go head to head to the person directly across from you in a fighting game, which I thought was cool. Uh, Obviously, I'm talking about Akihabara because that's when anyone talks about Japan, it's probably Akihabara because that's their place that a lot of foreigners know, obviously. But I thought that was a
Exactly.
cool thing where it's like they kept up with the times because yeah, it has competitiveness of like, hey, if you do this arcade game, you can actually fight the person directly in front of you, which most arcade game places still have with racing games where that's why those racing games are like in sets of like 4 or 6 so they can all interact and race against each other sometimes. So there's that aspect to it, but yeah, it's not the same. Also, with even back then, because I'm gonna move the timeline a little bit further to when I was a kid. There were still those arcade cabinets, but we started seeing the rise of like the skee ball, the carnival-esque games, and the big ones, the video games, the actual like big screen video games with like virtual guns. Those were one of my favorites because there was this one game I used to play all the time. I forgot what version of it was, but it was Time Crisis. I forget which one. It was the most addicting thing ever, and it was so fun because it was me and my friend. We would always go there, and me and him would try to play because it's a co-op rail shooter thing basically. You go from point to point, you shoot all the bad guys, but you're with your friends, so it feels more interactive, more uh real because you're with your friend and like, hey, we're gonna be on this together. We're gonna do this. It's gonna be fun. And while like online games can do that to an extent, there's nothing there's nothing more, I don't know, immersive than being right next to your buddy with your plastic fucking oversized gun aimed at the screen and just constantly trying to get through this level that you know if you die enough you have to put in more money into it to play. And
Exactly. And those type of games I still do like in the arcades. I feel like, it makes a sense of community. I don't know if that makes sense.
no, yeah.
Because we enjoy nothing more than, playing video games. At the same time, we still want to enjoy it with somebody else from time to time. It's nice just to have a bro or whoever on the side just, you know, guns blazing on a screen, shooting, I don't know, wave after wave of zombies or aliens. Like, it doesn't really matter what I'm playing as long as I just have somebody right there to play with me.
Yeah, and I think the term was like couch co-op, where you're basically right there next to your friend and you're doing things. The only problem about that was, you could do that now or even before back then as a kid. The only problem is those split screens were so annoying to look at. I'm not sure who thought that was a good idea to literally split the screen horizontally, make player one up at the top and player two on the bottom, because that's so, I don't know, it's like frustrating to deal with because you're used to looking at the center of the screen, right? Being like, oh, that's where everything is. That's where I'm going to see the most. But if you do that, you're going to go cross-eyed because you have two screens playing at the same time.
Exactly.
And that's why the arcade ones were so much better because they didn't do that. They put them together and like you shared one screen or it was like two separate screens but like actually separate screens and you got to see your side or the whole picture versus the split screen, which is stupid and no one should do that. Like no modern video
I,
game I believe does that because it's so bad to look at.
I can't deal with split screens. It's always been just like a sore on the eyes. It makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I don't think they do that anymore because yeah, it's dumb. You don't want to do that. But then again, that's another reason why arcade games are better for like live action co-op than that because it's just better. You have more to look at the big screen or two separate screens. You could have two separate screens with your buddy right now, but that you're looking at like two TVs. That's expensive. Or two monitors, I guess. But I don't know. And also speaking of back to that, that's what also some modern games are missing today is that whole of like the gimmick of the actual arcade being like Time Crisis or any shooter, you have the actual like plastic gun connected to the machine. Or the racing games, you have the actual like racing hard plastic motorcycle for anything of those type of games or something like that. There are even some older games that had this weird like fishing rod that was so clunky, but it felt like, hey, this is like fishing, right? Versus like now where it's like you use your mouse or your controller or your keyboard and it just doesn't feel the same. And even though
Yeah,
you have
and
sometimes they have like, oh, you can buy a like a steering wheel controller for your racing game and pedals. Yeah, fair, but you don't have like the motorcycle part, the one that where if you lean to the right, your arcade racer would not lean, he would go far into the wall to the right. But you at least you knew like, hey, if I move my body, actually it will move the character versus you're kind of stuck in that one sitting position.
exactly, and that always made me feel more like engrossed into the game. You know, just holding the plastic gun that had like God knows how many boogers and pepperoni cheese on it,
Oh, 100%.
or just the like the steering wheel, the seat, the pedals. It just made me feel more engrossed into the game. Just it made me feel better playing it. Nowadays, it's not the same feeling when you're just holding a small controller.
Right. And even with like Dave and Buster's, I don't know, something about it just even with like the arcade stuff, well, with their racing stuff, they don't have the motorcycle stuff. They just have the normal sitting ones, which is like you can get that at your house. But or the shooting ones feel fine, but again, it suffers from the same problem of you die way too fast because they want you to constantly put in the money to keep playing. Versus back then, if you were good enough, you could keep playing like with one token, and they didn't
I don't
care.
think
They're
I've
like,
ever,
hmm,
yeah, like I don't think I've ever completed an arcade game.
definitely not.
Like
But
at most, I just try two or three times. After that, I just move on.
for me, when I was a kid, me and my like friend from the way back in my past, when we played Time Crisis, that was the only game we played. And then his
Yeah,
dad was like, "Why didn't you play the other games? You guys could play the other games and get tickets and get prizes." But I'm like, "But but playing that game is more fun than doing the other one, so why not do this one?" Even though it
exactly.
was
And
you got nothing from it.
you got bro time. That's what you got.
Yeah, and that was better because if we play the other games, I guarantee it'll be me and him versus each other versus me and him playing a game together.
Well, I still want to
But
go to an arcade, but
like an
it's
old school
finding
arcade.
them are too. Yes, because we have an arcade off base in like local entertainment district.
Hmm.
It's a little two-story place, but it mostly just has dancing games, has a shooter game,
But not like
claw machine. Nothing really too serious. It's really small.
oh, so not like the actual like joystick controller and like buttons that like are kind of stuck, but so you have to push them a little bit hard. But if you push them too hard, they stick to inside.
Yeah, it's really modern.
Uh,
It doesn't have, Galactica or
the old
what else?
classic ones.
Pac-Man, just the retro games. Or Froggy.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, Dave and Buster's has this giant machine that's either Space Invaders or Galactica. I forget which one, but it's like super high scale because you don't control the dude on the bottom that's shooting. You control this like off-camera minigun just shooting at the screen, and I'm like, I guess it's okay, but it's not the same as having an arcade cabinet. You're actually engrossed into it versus you just have this giant plastic gun for no reason and you're just shooting at the screen. You could be any other game except for Galactica or Space Invader or whatever it was.
Another good one they had at Dave and Buster's, I'll give them credit for it, was the four-person Pac-Man.
Oh, the Pac-Man
Just a battle
Royale.
royale. Yeah.
That one was, yeah, that was okay. And they did have, I'm not sure they still have it, but they did have a Miss Pac-Man really close by too, right? Like an actual arcade machine Pac-Man.
Yes.
So at least
But I
there
think
was
that one was
that
just a
too.
single player.
I mean, well, yeah, that makes sense. Arcade games with the cabinets usually are single player. Oh, and small tangent. Back when I was working at this place, right? They actually sold. They were selling full arcade machines that you could download like actual arcade games into. And I was like,
No way, that's awesome.
yeah, and I was like, I kind of want to buy one, but I'm not sure if it's in my budget, and I don't have the space for it, which sucks because if I had the space for it and the budget, I would totally buy like a retro arcade machine and just play the old arcade games. But even then, it's still not gonna be the same because it's still at that point it's just another video game console. It's not the full experience.
Not unless you buy a few more, you just kind of make your own little arcade in your man cave.
For only me, that sounds pretty sad. That sounds like someone past their 30s trying to relive their childhood, like in a sad bubble.
Just trying to relive the good old bad days of their youth
Man, that's depressing.
before the wife calls them to dinner or, hey, honey, get back to the son's birthday.
I would never do that because that's so sad. Like, just unbelievably sad to do. Because like I understand you want the feeling of the arcade, but rebuilding an arcade in your basement for like just you is not. It's that's not it, Chief.
Also very expensive.
It is, but usually with those type of people, they have the disposable income, but they're not happy, so that's what they do. All right, but like that also reminds me. So we're talking about modern arcades, right? And how they're a lot different, and they have a lot of different aspects to them. But let's go super far into that topic and talk about how there are some, they're not a lot, but they're like starting to grow VR arcades. Because like a lot of arcades nowadays, they have the VR technology for some reason, where it's like, yeah, this game is a VR horror game, or this game is a VR shooter game, or like this one, you literally put on like an Oculus Rift or some sort of VR headset, like Player One, and now you're playing a huge game inside this arcade. And I was thinking, that's, I mean, even though it's not like the authentic arcade feel, that's pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie, because right now,
It's a new feeling.
yeah, right now VR they're commercially available, but they're not. It's not something a lot of people would go out of their way to buy. However, if you put it in an arcade, a lot of people are gonna try that because it's significantly cheaper and it's not a commitment. So I was thinking that's the one like modern like arcade I would be so down to go to constantly. It's just this like huge arcade, but everyone has like a VR helmet, and no one is talking to anyone else except for in game.
Just literally a warehouse full of people on VR headsets, not communicating, bumping into each other.
That is basically the plot of Player Ready Player One. But yeah, it's like, well, here's the thing. I wasn't thinking that far ahead to like wireless headsets. I'm talking about like they're wired to the ceiling, so you can only move a certain amount of space, and you're hooked up to a full like VR jumpsuit to like simulate how it feels like if your character bumps into someone, right? And you're completely immersed in that VR world, but you just see like 20 or 30 people in this arcade doing that at the same time, and the only one not immersed in it is like the people who are like the game attendants or the cashiers who are just kind of looking like they're done with life because everyone else is so immersed in their VR system.
Like while you're in the VR headset, you're battling zombies or climbing mountains, thinking you look like a complete badass. But on the other end, you're just looking like a damn fool running around.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah,
You,
most people in VR look pretty like to be honest, most people in VR look kind of funny because yeah, they're not doing we're not seeing what they're doing. We're just seeing nothing, them flailing around. Even with like Beat Saber, I'm not sure if you heard about that one game. It's a VR rhythm-based game, and
I know what
what
you're
was it?
talking about. And like you slice like these cubes
Yeah,
while a song's playing.
yeah. Even as
Yeah,
cool
my friend had it.
as cool as that is, and awesome it actually is, seeing that without the context is probably the most confusing thing ever. It almost looks like they're like possessed, which is why I think
Swinging their arms around.
yeah, which is why I think the VR arcade would be so fucking funny. Just to walk in before, like, if you're not used to seeing that, you're just like, what's going on here? And then you see someone who's like going in and they're like, yeah, you just pay the person and you plug in your helmet and you're done. You don't talk to anyone else.
I think VR headsets are the next step in gaming. Because because
Maybe.
I think that's what people want to do, where technology is constantly advancing and now, like VR headset are making their way into like movies, anime, just like with Ready Player One. And the concept of Ready Player One was cool, You're in an open world, you're your own avatar. If I had to pick, I'd probably be a clone trooper as my avatar because I can't shoot for shit, so that fits perfectly for me.
Right. Actually, this could be a further topic. I was gonna talk about VR versus what I AR. Well, I'll explain that later, but basically my stance on VR is it's kind of once we get to the point where we go into like full immersion, you have the vest and the jumpsuit on where you can feel everything and you can be more immersed into it, then yeah. But currently and until we get to that end goal step, I don't think VR is good in my opinion. It's just not there. I have a lot of issues in it, and I'll get into that in a further episode, but just know I am not a fan of VR.
VR, it's in its infancy, it's barely taking its first steps. It's going to be a while
I
before it
mean,
becomes more mainstream, more ready available, and better. It probably won't be during our time. By the time, maybe we're older, it'll more or less be stable.
I mean, fair. And I'll get again, like I said, I'll get more into it later or next time. But just one quick point: you say it's an infancy and will get better. So was the Wii, and it died out.
But the Switch,
But that's not
it's
the
it's
Wii.
still going strong. I
But that's
know,
not
but
the
I'm
Wii. It's a
saying that like
completely different thing.
some things I'm saying some things live, some things die. Like the
Mm,
PSP. It
oh,
came and it went.
oh no,
People forgot about it.
not the
The Nintendo
PSP.
DS, in my opinion, even though it died out, there's still a community of people that are still playing that little device.
Well, it became the
And
Switch, but yeah.
uh,
I was gonna say with
honestly, I
that,
forgot all about that.
yeah. With the Switch and 3DS. Okay, so with those instances, what's saying VR won't be the next one to be forgotten? But anyway, we'll save
You
that
make a
for a
valid
topic
point.
for next time. That would be a pretty good topic. But
Yeah.
back to like the arcades. I think it's just a Western thing now I think about it. Because the Western, we have access to the PC, more access anyway to PC because Microsoft, the main proponent of PC, is American based, right? So we have access to that, so we don't really need the arcades. It's just kind of a gimmick. But have you noticed, at least in Japan, and I'm pretty sure in other Asian countries, they're very arcades are going strong there.
And if anything, I feel like they're slowly growing
Yeah, which is
in just in Asia for the
yeah,
most part.
just in Asia. Like yeah, with Japan, the the biggest arcade is in Akihabara, and it's like this massive like you have claw machines, I think arcade machines, like cabinets, old ones, and then you got the fighting games where you can fight the person next to you. You have DDR, you have I don't know, probably VR stuff. Who knows? Like they're expanding, they're growing, and they're evolving, and a lot of people are supporting it
Those-
compared to here,
Yeah,
where the the only reason people are supporting Barnes and Nobles is not the arcade machines. It's the alcohol and food, let's be honest.
did
I've
you say
seen
Barnes and Noble?
did I say Barnes and Noble?
I think so.
Oh, well, I meant Dave and Buster's. I don't know why I said Barnes and Noble. No, the only reason people are supporting Barnes and Nobles is Starbucks. Anyway, no, kidding.
It's the only
Uh
reason why people go there.
that and the anime. Or anime, I mean manga.
Yeah,
Wow, you can tell I'm not an anime person.
you uncultured swine.
Any anyways, I've seen more people in the Dave and Buster's bar and restaurant area than the entire arcade area. And to be fair, though, I am taking some people from the arcade section and place them in the bar category because they are hanging around the bar section of the arcade.
Yeah,
Like, right?
like what you said earlier. Most people when they go to Dave and Buster's, they just mostly go there for the food and the drinks. The arcade, it's like secondary to them.
Right. It's just kind of
It also
bonus.
doesn't really, yeah, doesn't really also help that many of them are connected to malls. So eventually people just wander out and start buying stuff.
Right. Also, isn't it kind of weird that, like, let's say you go to a Dave and Buster's first, right? You go to that arcade and you drink and you play games, right? But you still go to the mall. Are you allowed in the mall after you're like wasted and you just finished gaming at the arcade?
Not unless you can play it off. But if you're stumbling and tumbling, you're more or less gonna catch someone's attention.
Right, you can catch the mall security and they're gonna boot you out.
Hmm.
But I also think it's hilarious that it's like, yeah, this place where you can have a bar, drink, and be just openly drunk and do dumb stuff in the arcade. You could then just walk 3 feet to your right and go to the mall, the open mall.
And then God knows how much on shoes
Right. So
or drunk spending.
like, did anyone think like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, that's fine? Or they're like, everyone was like, yeah, no, that's cool, that's totally okay. Uh, also,
I thought,
I love how that. This is how you can tell how scuffed my setup is. That I'm like right next door to like this dog in an alleyway, and you can totally hear it on the recording, so it's gonna be funny as hell. I'm gonna have to cut around it or something.
I
But
go ahead.
hmm?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. What were you saying?
No, nothing. But so here's the interesting thing about podcasting, right? We thought this was a cool idea to talk about, and I thought the arcade would be fun stuff to talk about, and we can explain and go more into detail. But I just want to take this really short time to say, how long do you think we've been doing this for?
I'm gonna say 55 minutes
It's
and 17 seconds.
it is barely 29 minutes.
Oh my God.
So yeah, so anyone who else is gonna start a podcast, just know it's gonna feel like you're talking for such a long time, and it's not.
Especially doesn't help when your laptop does not change time zones. Like right now, it's 9 a.m. Here in Korea, yet it's 7:19 p.m. on my
Right.
computer. It's still on California time. So my concept of time right now, especially since my phone broke last night during a I don't know, drunken rage, let's just call that. So I'm literally cut off from the outside world,
Right.
not even knowing what time it is.
What a wild time.
Hmm.
But anyway, so back to arcades. You want to talk about? All right, I want to talk about this. Would you consider the almost? All right, so this is we have the arcades, the classic arcades, right? I'm going to talk about this like spectrum of arcades. We have the classic arcades where you just go in, you put in your quarter, and you play Contra. I don't know, right?
Yeah.
Then you move up slightly, and now you have the shooting games. You have the type of games that you play, and you have the motion controlled plastic gun, and basically the arcades from Wreck It Ralph, right? Then somewhere further down the spectrum, you have Barnes and Dave and Buster's. You have Dave and Buster's where it's bar arcade and restaurant, and apparently by a mall. That's like, would you consider that that's the far end of the spectrum, or you can go further with the VR arcades?
I'm gonna go further with the VR
Right.
arcades.
So that means the VR arcades is like on the far side of the spectrum of like this is like right now as far as we can go from the other side, which is full VR. And then I would place like the Akihabara arcade like before, like significantly before the Dave and Buster's arcade because I don't think you can openly drink there because that's not what they're known for. Now,
Exactly.
now, where would you place? Consider these both places the same because they're basically the same. A Chuck E. Cheese and a Shakey's. Where would you consider that on the spectrum of arcades?
My childhood memories, that's where I'll put them first. But anyways, I'll put them in the
Fair.
middle, mainly because we grew up going to Chuck E. Cheese,
Yeah.
and it so it kind of set a standard for us as a child, of what we wanted to do, or what kind of video games we were into. So for me, I know Chuck E. Cheese, or what was the other one that was really mainstream?
Shakey's? Was that a thing?
Shakey's, yeah, there we go. They had an arcade as well. I always put them in the center just because of the sentimental value they had to me as a child growing up. That's a memory of gaming that'll never go away. Just being like 8 years old, chowing down like 5 slices of
Cardboard pizza.
pepperoni and cheese pizza that tasted like
Cardboard.
dog water. But then, asking my dad for a 20, going to the arcade and just having the time of my life,
No,
trying
because
to win as many tickets as I could
yeah,
just to buy toys that
that
would
you would
last me for a week.
yeah you would like throw away like instantly. Yeah, I mean, because like yeah, Chuck E. Cheese has a bad rap now because let's be honest, looking at it as an adult, it's not the best place to be. But like for a kid, yeah, like kids don't have the best taste buds, so that pizza, fine, whatever. That's what they want. That's what they want. And then, you know, you have the arcades that are just like, some of those games are cool, but most of them are just ticket farms. But that's fine. That's the ringing bells, the bright lights. That's gonna keep a kid's attention for like all an hour, multiple hours. Because let's be honest, you weren't there for like an hour. You were there for like 3 hours. If you were
If
a
you're
kid,
Mexican like my family, you'll be there for like
oof.
the whole afternoon. Yeah, man. So just as I was saying, the thing with Mexican families, we just often party hard and long. So when we would go to Chuck E. Cheese, we would just stay there for a few hours, enjoy just some pizza and then go to the arcade.
I like how you said
And
enjoy, but I think whenever anyone goes to like Chuck E. Cheese, only the kids would enjoy that pizza.
true, because back then the pizza was just really cheap. It was cardboard with tomato sauce and pepperoni just drizzled all over. I felt like Chuck E. Cheese, most of its money came from the arcade itself.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Or mm,
Oh
exactly.
yeah, continue. Go ahead. Sorry, it's interrupting.
Oh no, man, it's good. But so from what I remember back then, the Chuck E. Cheese. Wait, was it Chuck E. Cheese or Shakey's? I'm sorry.
This one, I was talking about the Chuck E. Cheese at the moment.
Okay, yeah, Chuck E. Cheese. So Chuck E. Cheese, it had a variety of games. It had skee ball, which is really popular among the kids and the adults. They're always playing that game. Basketball, shooter games, these little like random games that made no completely sense. Like the game would shoot to you a series of popcorn balls or ping pong balls, and your goal was to get them within the popcorn, box, and you would just be given tickets however many you could get in there. Racing games like always. And then the one thing that always stood out to me that I enjoyed the most were the tubes that were suspended from the ceiling. At the time as a kid, I really didn't think too much about it. I just went in there, had fun. But thinking back on those memories now as an adult, I realize that those tubes were pretty much dangerous because there wasn't much holding them, pretty much just cables and ropes. And I recall that there were instances where the tubes were just connected with ropes itself, and you would see kids just running through it like there's no tomorrow. I remember I got stuck a few times actually.
It is wild
So
to think that back then it was like, oh yeah, these tubes are so cool, they're so fun, they're like a whole nother world. When like, I feel like if you look back now, you can see like there's like four bolts just holding up an entire like mountain of tubes, and you're like, wow, that is one wrong bolt away from multiple injuries.
exactly, and then you also got to factor in that there's kids in there. So at the same, none of them are walking or just, going at a steady pace. No, they're running and dashing through these things, playing tag, slamming against the walls, because that's what they do. That's what I did with my cousins. We would go up there and just run around. So literally, this was a walking hazard. And these tubes were on top of the arcades itself. So if the tubes fell, well, you would just have one big old mess.
That's weird. The
I
Chuck E.
think
Cheese's, I went to as a kid. They were at least separate, so you would, if that, I guess, in case something did happen, the arcade would be safe. Screw the safety of everyone else. The arcade has to stay safe.
there's one thing I always wonder about who at the Chuck E. Cheese corporate decided it would be a good idea to suspend these tubes on top of the arcade. Like, was just safety just thrown out back in the day? Like, what compelled someone to bring that up?
I
Because
mean,
the ones at the Burger King, they weren't suspended from the ceiling. They were connected, to the ground. Burger King, McDonald's, or they were always separate
yeah.
from the arcades.
I mean, yeah, back then, people could get away with a lot of stuff back then because they were like, there's no rules that say I can't, so I'm gonna do it. Then that's how you have
Exactly.
some super
And
hazardous stuff, like those tubes as well. I remember there were sections where there was no tube. There was just netting that the kids would just crawl across to get to the other tube while they were like 10 feet in the air. I don't know, that's probably a lot more than it is, but pretty high up. And I'm like, that
pretty
seems
high up
just
for a kid.
very dangerous and unsafe. And I could, even as an adult now, if I saw it, I'm like, you know what? How about no? How about that doesn't happen?
Exactly. And you're also thinking about why did parents let their kids go up there?
I think either parents were just like, yeah, it should be fine. I mean, if it wasn't fine, it wouldn't be there, right?
Exactly. And I think, at that point, the parents, they just wanted to make sure their kids had.
Sure.
Seeing their kids suspended in the ceiling, running around in tubes on top of an arcade, just maybe the parents were just like, you know what, they're safe, it's good. Chuck E. Cheese is a big corporation. They wouldn't do something that'll endanger us or our kids.
Sure. Speaking of endangerment, remember, I'm not sure if you heard about this, but there's so many horror stories about the Chuck E. Cheese play area where it's like, yeah, no, a bunch of kids got pink eye because someone pissed in the ball pit and didn't say anything. Or in those tubes, hey, a kid found this dark corner in the tube and had to use the restroom so they could. They just went there, and it's like, wow, that's very unsanitary.
It's amazing how our perspective of Chuck E. Cheese has changed as we grew older.
Well, even as a kid, my mom didn't let me go into ball pits because even she knew that, hey, there was multiple stories about people peeing or actually sometimes doing more in the ball pit, and it's just like, well, don't go in there. And I was like, you got it, because when she told me that, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna stay far away from that. Even as a kid, I was like, that's a bad thing to go into.
Exactly. And I wanted to bring up a quick side note too. Have you ever heard about those like conspiracy theories about Chuck E. Cheese on how they like to reuse old cheese? I mean, old pizza? Because nowadays I've been going onto YouTube and people are releasing their like conspiracy theories saying that when they go back to Chuck E. Cheese and order pizza, the pizza as a whole, it is not equal. It's as if the cooks in the back, they just get old slices and just attach them to form a new pizza.
Right.
And people are sharing photos and videos. I just wanted to bring that up. For some reason, talking about that
It's brought
reminded
up.
me
I
of that
feel
growing.
I feel like if that was an actual thing and there was more proof, there would have been a lawsuit by now. I think what happened is, because I've helped make pizza before. Sometimes it doesn't come out to a perfect circle if you don't have enough dough or the pizza pan is too big or you just don't care about your job, like probably most of them don't. Uh, so they probably just did it by hand and it just didn't come out, you know, as uniform as it should. And they're just like, who cares? And they just send it out.
That is a valid point. And this is Chuck E. Cheese we're talking about. They're not really known for quality. They're just about quantity, getting as much pizza as they can out there so the kids can eat it and go back to the arcades
Right. So
or
if any,
the pipes of death, as we'll
yes.
call them.
So if anything, they're just in a rush and things don't come out perfectly every time when you're in a rush. But the only reason we brought up that area is because it's weird, but technically, right, Chuck E. Cheese has an arcade, but does that make that entire area an arcade? And if so, that means we have an arcade category that includes like a play area, which is weird. Would you consider
Yeah,
Chuck E. Cheese as a whole like an arcade?
I would say Chuck E. Cheese has its own take on arcade because just like you said, it has a section of arcade, but also has a section of entertainment. The suspended tubes in the ceiling, and from what I recall from going to different Chuck E. Cheeses, they also had little rides within the Chuck E. Cheese itself, like a little mini Ferris wheel, like little like air rides that don't really go with the idea of an arcade. So then that's where the question comes into what aspect of the Chuck E. Cheese itself is an arcade and what aspect is an entertainment zone.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Uh, I mean, I just kind of think like since it has the arcade section, why wouldn't it be an entire arcade? Because if we're going by like the separate like oh it has separate things, so it's like kind of like segmenting the arcade from everything else, that would mean Dave and Buster's as a whole is not an arcade because it has different sections. So then it really comes down to how much are you going to segment out of it to decipher what's an arcade. And that's why I said the easiest thing is if it has the arcade stuff, it's probably as a whole, or at least a majority of it, is like the arcade, right?
Yeah, I see what you mean. I
And
agree with you on that then.
and by going by that logic, do you remember Chuck E. Cheese's animatronics? Because those were right next to the arcades. No matter where you looked, there would be this giant, horrific robot mouse, basically.
Oh, you mean the inspirations for Five Nights at Freddy?
Basically, that's what they were. I mean,
The
yes,
animatronics of death, as
yeah.
you can probably describe them.
I no
Yeah,
kid would want to see that thing come alive. Like we would all see it and we'd be like, "Oh, that's terrifying," right? But none of us, I remember when I was a kid at least, none of us saw it move because if we did, we'd probably freak out because those things were terrifying.
they were, and they really didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Like thinking back as a child, half the time the animatronics were broken or they were down for maintenance. So I really didn't get to see them perform a whole lot as a child. And on top of that, they were scary. That it didn't make sense to me. Like why is there this enlarged animatronic rat or I forgot what the other mascots were called, moving around, singing and dancing, and then Next thing you know, you got this one dude coming out in a Chuck E. Cheese costume with your pizza, bringing it to you. And as a kid, it freaked me out. I remember I cried and screamed a few times. Same thing with my little cousins. They did not like seeing the animatronics or the people in the costumes. It just terrified us. Didn't
Well,
make sense to us.
well, yeah, it's like the people in costume. It kind of makes sense because they mascots, but then why would you have these barely functioning, creepy moving robots for your mascot as well? And
Playing the same song over and over on the hour.
right, and the best or worst part was that it was technically part of the arcade because it either had an arcade on its left and right, so it was directly in the middle, or it was very close by to it. So it's like they wanted you to be like, "Hey, I know you're in the arcade, but technically this is also part of it too, so you should enjoy these horrible nightmare fuel creatures." But it's
I just
so
want to know
hmm,
who designed the whole
I
concept of Chuck E. Cheese. Just putting it all together. Just think about it. The animatronic section, the arcade, the suspended pipes in the ceiling, and then just the little like fair rides. Like it felt like Chuck E. Cheese. They started with the concept of the arcade, but then they just started branching out, adding more and more to it.
I feel like they started out with the play area first, and then they added the arcade. Because I feel like you can put the play area in first, and then while you're getting the money to get more stuff, then you can start slowly adding the arcade system. But you're right. When we see Chuck E. Cheese commercials when we were kids, and even now, the forefront is the arcade. And like that's the thing. You always see people winning using their Chuck E. Cheese special coins and then getting the tickets and being like, "Oh, we're so happy" on his commercial, and you're like, "Oh, so they're mostly that." So I could see it being the first thing, but I don't see it from a logical perspective why they wouldn't start with the play area, which I believe has been taken out because of reasons, sanitary reasons, actually.
Exactly. From what my cousins back home told me, a lot of Chuck E. Cheese's, they removed the suspended pipes from the ceiling. Apparently, there was like a series of accidents or just parents like making reports that they just didn't feel safe with them.
I mean, fair.
Because I also realized that, those same like pipes, they're disappearing from McDonald's, Burger King. There's still a few of them. Like I'll see them from time to time, but not as often as before when I was growing up.
Right.
And then speaking of McDonald's, did you ever go to a McDonald's or a Burger King that had its own arcade?
They had their own arcades?
So there was this one McDonald's that was near my grandma's house when we lived with her as a kid in Los Angeles. It was a two-story McDonald's.
A
You know, the
two-story McDonald's?
yeah, because it was a really big one. You had two restaurants to it, so it had the one on the first floor, which people would just walk in to order the food, and then the second floor was the drive-through. But getting back to the arcade, this McDonald's, it was different. Not only did it have an arcade, but the arcade had Nintendo 64 games. We're talking about Mario Kart, Donkey Kong, the Legend of Zelda, and it even had the original N64 controllers. So you weren't using the joystick and the buttons. I vaguely remember as a kid, and I remember I enjoyed myself there. And it had a wide selection of games. It had over like 20 or 30 screens with, the different games. Unfortunately, now, from what I've heard, most of those games in the arcade are shut down or they're removed. Because as times went on, people just stopped using them less and less. I just wanted to
Right.
bring that up
No,
because it reminded me
that's fair, but
that
also I can't wrap my head around the fact there was a McDonald's with its own arcade and it wasn't in like a super rich posh area.
no, we're
Or
talking about smack dead in the center of Los Angeles,
that is
right off the
weird.
60 freeway, I
'Cause-
believe.
Yeah,
It
cuz
was
like
near my grandma's house.
it's not like we're talking about LA now, we're talking about LA in the past. I'm surprised that thing hasn't been like robbed or like stolen at least once.
I do remember that there was a growing issue that people kept on stealing the N64 controllers. Because
Oh, just the
looking back on the
controllers.
earliest parts of my memory, I remember that they just had little cables so you can play. But eventually, a few years later, when I went back, the controllers were attached to the screens, like with these big old plastic wires, because people kept on stealing them, the controllers.
Right.
Because, nowadays the N64, it's, it's an OG console. So of course people would steal the controllers from the arcades.
Right.
So the restaurant had to do something about it, which is probably why they had to get rid of the arcade itself.
Man, you can't have anything good.
Yeah. Like
But
that was pretty awesome. Just thinking back on that.
yeah, that's so wild to me. Like I already know that two-story McDonald's are a thing because in New York, that's basically what they did because that's how they have, that's how it's set up because you can't have anything horizontal. There's not enough space, so they did vertically. So I'm like, that makes sense. But for them to also have an arcade is insane.
I think it was just an experiment at that time.
Probably. I believe
A
that's.
noble experiment.
I'm pretty sure there's none other in those areas, especially in LA. That's like, yeah, we're gonna do that too. That's like asking for trouble in LA.
Yeah, I would probably have to text my cousin in LA and tell him to hit that place up and tell me if the arcade is still standing
Probably
or if
not.
it's a shadow of its former glory.
Definitely Shadow. But
Yeah.
also, speaking of like restaurants with like or not restaurants. I mean, if you consider fast food a restaurant, but food areas with arcades. You remember Shakey's? How they have this weird, very sad, dimly lit arcade corner?
Yes, I remember Shakey's, dude. I went there plenty of times as a child.
I've been to
Those things were everywhere
Shakey's.
in Los Angeles.
Right. I've been to Shakey's quite a bit of times, but I've never been inside it because by the time when I went there, I was like, I don't know, like 18, 20. It'd be kind of weird to go into a Shakey's arcade at like 18, 20, unless you're with a group of friends and you were very drunk. But the one time I went there, it was in high school. I believe you were there too. And it was my very first time. We had like some pizza, some mojos, whatever, and then we went straight for the arcade. And we were like, oh, this should be cool. There was something about that area that seemed so sad because one, we were like the only people in the entire restaurant there, like in general. Two, it was so dimly lit you couldn't barely see anything but the machines, which was weird and shady. And also the games were just some of them just didn't work. I think there were like four skee ball machines, and one of them just had an out of order sign that looked like it's been there for a while. And there was like nothing there, and this was really weird. And that's probably not a good uh experience, or I guess like showing off what a Shakey's arcade is. So if you have any more experience with Shakey's arcades than me, feel free to share it.
So there was this one Shakey's in Los Angeles that my family would frequent, for parties, family gatherings, graduations. It was a lot better than the one we went to back in high school, but comparing a Shakey's arcade to that of a Chuck E. Cheese is like, comparing a Chihuahua to a pit bull. There's no comparison at all. But this one that we went to often, growing up as a child, it was pretty decent. It had like a few skee balls, racing games. What else did it have? Two basketball hoops. One of them was always broken. This game in the center where like it had a wheel and it had numbers. And you would had have to hit a button. Depending on what number you would get that amount of tickets. And then what else did it have? It had like a few quarter games, a Pac-Man, a Miss Pac-Man surprisingly too.
Wow.
So it was nothing compared to the Chuck E. Cheese, but it was enough for me as a kid and for my family that we enjoyed ourselves. We would go there often. It was our go-to place.
Right.
And it was a good like backup if the Chuck E. Cheese arcade was full and packed.
Right. And
I think people just went to Shakey's just for the food because
yeah,
Shakey's pizza was better than that of Chuck E. Cheese. Because
by
you had the
miles.
mojos, the chicken.
Miles better.
It like I think that's where the money went or came from,
Right. Yeah,
just the food.
yeah, because I feel like most people go to Shakey's just for the food because the pizza's good, the mojo's good, the chicken's great. The arcade, no one's there for the arcade, not
Mhm.
even the kids. If they wanted the arcade, yeah, they
Exactly.
would go to Chuck E. Cheese. Which, hilariously enough, there's a Shakey's by me where it's almost directly across the street from a Chuck E. Cheese.
Oof, talk about steep competition. I can only assume
Ah,
that
maybe
people go to the Shakey's
for the
when Chuck E.
food.
Cheese is packed.
But I
Yeah.
feel like they would go to eat at the Shakey's and then go to Chuck E. Cheese for like the arcade while the parents drink because you can apparently order beer there, which is wild.
At Chuck E. Cheese?
Yeah, did you not know that? Apparently, it was I think it was a recent or so, but they added beer to their menu for the adults because they know the adults aren't going to eat their food.
It's about time. Shoot, maybe I should go.
I don't. Do they even have Chuck E. Cheese in Korea?
No, they don't.
That's what I was thinking.
They do
But
have arcades here.
I mean, true. But also, speaking of like arcades in general, that's Shakey's, right? Super shady, super bad, right? But you know what it still had? It still had an emphasis on tickets. Like, no matter how bad it was, they still had someone manning the ticket, like, reward area, basically. And they just had these constant, like, people being like, oh, yeah, if you did this, your tickets, you get to exchange it. And then it got me thinking, like, at what point did arcades just be from like, hey, you're there to have fun, be your friends, play some interesting games and mechanics you would never play anywhere else, to hey, did you get enough tickets? Hey, did you get enough this for this? And it's so weird that that is a mentality that after a certain point going to an arcade, that's what you had to do. If you didn't get tickets, you weren't doing it right, according to some people.
Yeah, and just you can tell too that the prizes they had for kids to win, they were just stuff that they bought at the dollar store, you know. Looking back, the prizes that I can remember were like Tootsie Roll Pops, little pieces of chocolate, those dollar store Army Man, just little things that you can buy at the Dollar General or 99-cent store, which we had in Los Angeles.
Right.
But the prizes they give out nowadays at arcades, especially like at Dave and Buster's, have completely changed from the ones we would get as kids at Chuck E. Cheese and Shakey's.
Right. Like, don't get me wrong though. Those like mine were like dinosaurs and like army men. Those were cool when I was a kid. I was like, oh, I could get those. They're really, really great. But the prize, yeah, right. The prizes now though are insane. Like at Dave and Buster's, once me and Chris went one time, we saw a legitimate Ninja blender, one of the top end blenders you could get and buy that are like $100, $200. You could get at this Dave and Buster's for an insane amount of tickets, by the way. It wasn't just like, oh, like 500 tickets. I think it was like upwards to 30,000 tickets for this thing. And it's
I remember
wild.
that.
What was that?
I feel like if you go to that arcade and you want to get that Ninja blender, you would have to calculate, you know, how much money you would have to spend and how many tickets you would have to win in order to get that blender while making a profit.
I mean, yeah. And I feel like they already done that because they're not going to be like, hey, we're going to put this for like this thing that we think is a lot, but then they find out, hey, people can pay like $50 and get that if they're good. So they're probably like, we got to raise it up to a certain point where it's an investment. If even if you're good, the amount of times to get those tickets, they probably have made back the money from buying the blender at least once by the time you have enough to even buy it.
Exactly. And the longer you stay there, the more, you know, alcohol, beverages, food you're gonna buy. So they're also making more money on the side. Because
Right,
why not, you know? You're there, you're in the arcade, so you're gonna want to eat and have more fun.
right.
So Dave and Buster's just making more money off of you.
But that being said, there's this weird like community in YouTube where it's like, hey, I'm gonna show you the best arcade games to get the most tickets that require the least amount of effort. And I'm just like, at what point did this become the thing now where instead of just going to have fun, maybe getting tickets to play, you're like, I'm gonna give you guys a detailed guide on how to basically try to beat the house, beat the arcade system. And it's just like, why do we need this? I understand some people want to do that, but like it seems so weird to try to min max and be the best at the arcade, I don't know, like cabinet specifically to get tickets versus like, hey, that's a cool new arcade thing. Let's try it out. Or like, hey, let's just see what's going on here instead of being like, if I don't get X amount of tickets in X time at this machine, I need to wait the next day because maybe then they'll reset it, which is an actual strategy this dude talks about. And it's wild.
I can't do that. I'm a risk taker. I want to go to the arcade with no strategy and just take my chances, seeing if I could win one ticket or maybe 100 tickets. I don't want to, put the time and effort into mastering an arcade game because I don't want to do that. When I play video games, I want to unwind. I don't want to think too hard. I don't want to strategize. I just want to, point and shoot or hit the gas pedal and win, get first place. I'm a simple man with simple taste.
But you're not a simp. But like,
Yeah.
but I mean, yeah. Can you imagine that though? Like you're in the arcade, right? You're having a good time. You maybe have a couple beers or so. You're with your friends, and then you see this guy who's just constantly at this one machine, right? And you're like, oh, it's fine, right? But then you notice just this constant trail of like tickets, or I guess in Dave and Buster's case, like constant amount of like him swiping his card or getting stuff on his card because they do a cards there. And then you notice throughout the day, like sometimes you're like, oh, does he do something different? No, he doesn't. He's at this one machine. And then you're like, oh, this is kind of weird, right? But let's say you go back the next week, you probably see that same dude there doing the exact same thing, trying to min max the system. At what point do you just be like, wow, that is very sad, and I feel like you're not here to have fun anymore?
Exactly, because it just draws a question, are they there to have fun playing in the arcade or that with that one particular game, or they're just to hustle the
I,
Dave and Buster's and get a prize? I feel like doing that draws fun away from the experience of the arcade itself. You're just
right,
not there to game anymore. You're just there to win a prize and get out.
right.
But even then, if you truly want to win a prize, don't just play one game. Play the whole arcade because that's what the experience of an arcade is. Going from game to game, whether it's a shooter game, a racing game, skee ball, or like those indoor soccer games.
Oh yeah,
It's for me, I just can't see myself doing that. Playing with one game in arcade. No, I gotta do the whole thing, the whole shebang, because I want to get my money's worth. It's not every day you go to Dave and Buster's or an arcade.
right. And like, especially like nowadays, but like, I feel like these people who do that, they they want to get the prize right. That's their fun. But like, my main problem with that is that if they're there, they're just doing that constantly. What if that game is like a kid's favorite game, right? And now you've taken that up just to win tickets. Meanwhile, this kid doesn't care how many tickets he has. He just wants to play his favorite game. But he can no longer do that
Exactly.
because you're doing that for tickets.
Putting in God knows how many dollars in there. And also begs the question, how much money did these people spend until they figured out the system that'll allow them to win X amount of tickets to get the prize that they want? Not
Probably a
unless they
lot.
went online and they found someone who can tell them how to win.
But
But
then that person must have done it.
yeah, so at some point you realize that someone or many people actually, they failed, tried again and again until they figured out the system. But just how much money did that arcade make off of them until they figured out a system? And even then, I feel like
Way
arcades,
more.
they're well aware of this, of this
100%.
community online. So they're probably taking steps already to counter them.
100%. That's yeah. There's just like, or they'd be like, hey, they did it, but hey, now we can restock in our entire reward center,
Hmm.
probably multiple times if they're like constantly there. And it's just like
Yeah, and
you accomplish nothing basically.
look, just as the saying goes, the house always wins.
I mean, right? I mean, not
And
to get
now,
to
yeah,
gambling,
and
but basically,
just yeah, and nowadays too, Dave and Buster's or even like Chuck E. Cheese's and Shakey's, they're incorporating bigger and better prizes at their ticket booths. It's no longer, well, they still have, the
the army
little
men.
army men, ninjas, dinosaurs, Tootsie Rolls, but behind a glass window, you see the new Xbox, the new PlayStation, a Ninja Blender, or still like stuffed animals, like things that'll draw people into the arcades and put more money into them. Like it's no longer the simple dollar store toys that we loved as children. It feels like they're catering now to adults.
Well, yeah, because I feel like nowadays kids aren't gonna be like, I need all these tickets to get the Army Men. They'll just be like, I'm just here to have fun. While the adults are like, hey, if I play this enough, I could potentially get, the Ninja Blender or the Xbox, basically. So now it's just like you're catering to the people who you know are already gonna be interested in getting that item
Exactly. And
versus
catering to the people who grew up playing in your arcades years ago.
right,
Because now they have kids or families, so they're going back to their childhood, Chuck E. Cheese's, Shakey's, and now, the house wants them to play on top of with the kids, so boom, they're
right.
bringing out these fresh new prizes just for them.
Can you imagine at a pretty high end ish arcade that can only see working in like Japan or any higher, yeah, just Japan, let's be honest, where the prizes are actual food, like straight from like a bakery. Like they have a bakery or an oven where it's like, hey, if you give an X amount of tickets, we'll give you like a meat bun straight from the oven. Can you imagine
That's a
that?
good take. Yeah,
I don't know about
I did not
that.
know that.
No, no, I'm saying like, what if there was a thing? Because I'm pretty sure it doesn't, and there's probably reasons for that. But I just want to imagine, because that way, it's more substantial. Because I feel like with the toys and whatever, it's like it's whatever. But if you're actually actual food, I feel like people would try more, or there would be like, yeah, they'll be more incentivized, or be kind of fun to do. I guess the
I can see
American
that
version of
working.
that would be like, hey, if you get 100,000 tickets, you get a free shot of your choice of alcohol. That is,
I would prefer getting, a free meal, free burger and fries with a soda.
yeah, that
But
also
the
could
free
work.
alcohol can be compelling.
Like, I feel like they really should be doing that instead of like, hey, here's an Xbox One or here's a Ninja Blender. Just be like, hey, if you play this enough and you get enough tickets, we'll just give you a free lunch or like, and not even
Free
probably not a
meal.
free lunch because that's probably a lot of money. Just be like, we'll give you small fries. I don't know. I feel like that would be
That'd be another way.
better still.
True, a new take on prizes.
Speaking of new takes, you went to the arcade close to your base, right?
Yeah, I went to the local entertainment district right off base. It had a nice two-story arcade, like right on the main strip. I went in there. It had a lot of claw machines. Like it had a whole row of claw machines, mostly just catering to the couples. There were a few couples there playing, mostly American soldiers with their Korean honeys trying to win them a prize that they probably had 10 of back home. And the second floor, it had a lot of Dance Revolution games, just people competing against one another. It had this one weird shooter game. So the gun itself was an M4 rifle, and your
Interesting.
targets were pinballs. And that just
Okay.
did not make sense to me. And it was shooting little BBs. The pinballs, they were very miniature and small, so you can easily knock them over, but that just stood out to me. It was in the way back, hidden in some corner, so you really didn't catch it unless you explored the entire area.
Right.
But from what I saw, this arcade, it mostly just catered to couples. It had couple games like the Dance Revolution, the Claw Machine, uh, I think like six racing car games
Okay.
side by side. There was a few people on them. So it was a new and interesting experience to see how an arcade is in Korea. I'd probably have to go out to like Seoul or maybe one of the surrounding cities just to see how the arcades are as well. But going to that one arcade, it was a good starting point.
Right. Now, were the dance games on the second floor or the first floor?
The second floor, so you can constantly hear stomping.
I was about to say that seems like a bad thing to do because you have just a constant. sound of people trying to do like DDR or whatever upstairs. Why would they put that upstairs?
Who knows? And actually, I forgot one thing too. On the second floor in the back, they had these little booths where you can go in like as a party or just solo, and you can sing Korean songs.
So
That
basically,
threw me off. I was not expecting that. I was expecting, the little photo booths. You would
right.
go in with your friend or your, girlfriend, boyfriend, take a few photos with a nice background. No, they had these insane booths where you can do karaoke in the arcade. And I was like, that's a first. I was not expecting that.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect that either. But so you're saying they basically had a karaoke minus the bar at a arcade?
Yes,
Wow.
numerous of them actually. I think there was four, just little rooms within the second floor. They can go in. Looks like they can hold like 5 or 6 people, and you just can sing Korean songs
Wow.
or
That is
K-pop.
wild. Well, yeah, that's pretty wild. But I mean, to be fair, with I feel like that's a thing in like a lot of Asian countries where they have like a pretty big influence on the music industry. They gonna have some sort of karaoke things where they can throw it in because why wouldn't you? It just
Exactly. And it just
does,
reaffirmed
yeah.
my belief that this arcade was catering to couples or, a group of people, not really the individual person that goes to an arcade for fun.
You know, it'd be funny. You should try to get your coworkers or your friends there and go to that karaoke place and arcade and just see what happens. How fun it is.
Oh, we would make asses of ourselves, because this arcade, it's on the main strip that has bars for days. So you have people stumbling and tumbling throughout the day. So if we do go there, we're gonna go after we have a few beers and cocktails, which is
Right.
gonna make the experience even better. Because
Yeah. That reminded me of something. Do you think going to an arcade now as an adult, clarification here, as an adult, do you think it's better to go to like one of those things when you're drunk or not at all? Because I understand the whole thing of like when you're drunk there, you're like more open for it. You're more want to have fun. You want to do things, right? But then I feel like once you're drunk though, you can barely function, especially at an arcade where there's a lot of flashing lights and coordination you have to do. And I feel like you just might hurl faster if you're drunk at an arcade. What do you think?
I agree with you on that. Because, like you said, when you're intoxicated or just having a few, beers, cocktails, tequila. I'm not a man of tequila myself, but if when you go, you're not going to be, experiencing the arcade as a whole. You're probably not even going to remember your time in there. So for me personally, I wouldn't go to an arcade after a night of drinking because just seeing all those bright lights or like especially having a turn at the Dance Dance Revolution, it would destroy me.
That's
You're
how you
probably going to see
hurl.
me fall off the second floor
Yeah,
from the window because interesting enough, the Dance Dance Revolution section is located right next to the windows,
I feel
and
like
there's
they.
no railing blocking
Oh,
you.
oh, that's
So,
weird.
if airmen, I mean, if, I don't know, someone is just up there dancing, taking it too far after a few drinks, there's a good chance that they'll just hit themselves against the window.
Right. I feel
And
like
worst case scenario, plunge.
yeah. I was gonna say I feel like that's for like basically free advertising to show off. Hey, people are having fun up there. Why don't you come in as well?
Yeah, I
That's
can
my
see
take
what
on
you
that.
mean.
Also, here's the thing. I will say, yeah, arcade's probably better when you're sober, but like I guess it really depends too, because like an old retro style arcade, they're probably not gonna have a full bar, so you're probably not gonna get drunk, or if you are, you're drinking like cheap beer, so you're probably not getting drunk anyway. So it's fine. But like Dave and Buster's, they have two bars, like two actual bars, one in the dining area and one directly in the middle of the arcade. And with that one, I feel like you might as well. I mean, if you're gonna do it, I wouldn't put it against you because it's right there. And yeah, they have some decent stuff there. Like I remember we did shots there one time, and it was all right. It was okay. It's just that looking back on it now, is like, did it add to the experience? No, but technically that is a bar, so that's a bar experience, right?
I think it's good to do that when you're at Dave and Buster's, because that's
Right,
part of the experience. Like you said, they have two bars, one connected, near the tables, and one in the center of the arcade. So while you're there at the Dave and Buster's, just why not? Go ham with your friends, have a few shots of whatever or a few beers, go for it.
I feel like yeah, it depends. You're not gonna be like, hey, I want like a shot of Jaeger at like a retro arcade. That just seems weird to do.
No, I wouldn't do that at retro arcade because retro arcades it has the classics, games you want to enjoy,
Right,
games that'll reconnect you with your childhood. So for me, I would say yes and no. Yes, if you're at a arcade like Dave and Buster's that has more newer games, but no, if you're at a retro arcade with the classics, because
right,
like we said, retro games you want to enjoy them. You want to relive the good old glory days of your childhood. Dave and Buster's, it's for adults. You just want to go in there and have a meal, have a few drinks, and play the games.
right.
So yes and no.
Yeah, that's fair. But you know what type of arcade that is like this weird situation? Because is it an arcade? Maybe, but it could be. But I could see no one drinking there because of actual concerns about the machines and how that it will not infect, affect your gaming capabilities. There's this branch of like computer lounges where it's like, hey, you pay us for X amount of time. Guess what? You get access to uh, pretty good PCs where you could just play a game or do work, which most people don't. They just play games there at this arcade. Or, I mean, it is an arcade, right? I mean, am I wrong in assuming that computer lounges are basically higher end arcades because you're paying for your time there? You're playing a game there if you want, or just using it for whatever, and having a good time there, right?
I would say it's a new take on the concept of arcades. Because as we discussed, Shakey's version of arcade is different from that of Chuck E. Cheese, which is different from that of Dave and Buster's. Now, these computer lounges are a new idea to it. Like you said, you go in, you play on these computers that more than likely have what is it called? Dota, League of Legends, Killing Floor 2. So I feel like to a degree, it is still an arcade in the sense that you're going there to play video games, but at the same time, you're not playing like with the joystick or the racing games, or there's no ticket booth for prizes. So it's like yes and no, that it's an arcade.
Right. But also at those computer lounges, you don't see any alcohol there at all. But the funny thing
I
is,
cannot see that anytime soon because we're talking about having alcohol or beer near some pretty expensive, computers.
right. But here's the funny part. There was this computer lounge that me and all my friends went to. You went there too, where you couldn't get, alcohol, right? But there was a vending machine inside where you could get a Monster Energy or straight up
Which is
coffee.
just I vaguely remember that arcade. I remember we went there because it was right next to a theater, right?
It
Was
was
it a
right next to
Harkins
the
or?
Harkins, yeah.
Yeah, because I know we went there once. We went to the sushi restaurant right next to the Harkins. Then we hit
Oh
up that computer lounge, and then proceeded to see a movie. I forgot what it was, but yeah, I vaguely remember that time. I think we were playing like Killing Floor 1,
Probably. Yeah, probably.
and I think we did a round of League of Legends. That was it.
Dude, but it's so weird to me that's like, hey, do you want, not water, but hey, you could pay to get a Monster Energy drink, the most stereotypical drink for a gamer out there, and it's hilarious
I'm more of
that
a
they just
Bang man
have it.
myself.
Yeah, it's just like I'm not really an energy person. I'm more of a coffee person. But
More of a, Bang
what?
water, and so I don't know. It depends on my taste and what game I'm playing.
Yeah, that's fair. Probably just water when I'm gaming, because if I need to get some sort of water at some point. But I mean, even with those computer lounges, right? They're dying off fast because at least here in America, everyone has a PC. So why would they go to a computer lounge when they have a probably better PC at home waiting for them, where they could have anything they want? You want a sandwich? Go downstairs or whatever to your kitchen. There you go. You want something to drink? Same thing. It's in your comfort of your own home compared to like a computer lounge. What are you gonna do if you get hungry? Nothing. What are you gonna do if you get thirsty? I guess drink a monster.
Exactly. I think computer lounges were just a trend that, people tried and they got over with immediately. Just like with the Wii. It came, it went, and now it's a distant memory of the past.
Right.
Because just like you said, the way people game has changed dramatically. Like, why go to a computer lounge when you can make your own PC at home? Now you can now customize it and play whatever games you want in the comfort of your own home the way you want to.
Right.
So I feel like that's why computer lounges are just slowly dying out.
Yeah, exactly. But I will say, in a lot of the Asian countries, computer lounges are super popular. But that's because they don't have access to computers at their house. Or a private one at least, because they may have like a family one, but they don't have a private one. So where would you go? You'd go to the computer lounge.
Speaking of those computer lounges, from what I've heard, there are a few in Japan
Yeah.
that have little like bars, restaurants, showers, manga libraries too, because apparently nowadays people are living within those computer lounges.
Hmm.
So what do the lounges do? They're now bringing home to them. Because why go back to your home when you can just shower there, grab a meal? It just that just blew my mind when
So
I
like
was
a
learning
mini
about
hotel,
computer lounges
basically.
in Japan. Yeah,
Huh.
I'd like to go to one of these days just to see how it is
I
and
feel
see
like
if it's true. See with my own eyes.
if you go to one, actually, it might be cool, but also might be sad. Because a lot of those people
Mm.
are also, uh, in no way offense, but they are very, what's the word I'm looking for here? Shut in, I think the word is.
I believe it's called Hikikimori
I
in
wouldn't
Japan.
know.
Don't quote me on that. I could be wrong, but
You're talking to an
I've heard of
uncultured
that.
person, so I wouldn't have any idea. But
Exactly.
I feel like those type of people who are gonna do that are either worked to the bone to the point where they can't go home, so they might as well just go there, or people who just want to, I guess, live on their computer, which is kind of both equally sad.
I did see a documentary on that, computer lounges, and they interviewed a few people there. There was this one girl who said that she was basically living there, that she didn't want to, rent an apartment or buy a home because she didn't want to be alone. She was going through some personal issues, so the comfort that a computer lounge brought, it gave her her own little room, but at the same time, she was with other people next door. And then, they had a fair amount of people there who couldn't afford homes or apartments, so they were just living in that computer lounge. They would go there, sleep, eat, head to work, repeat. So I feel like computer lounges in Japan are a pretty dark thing, but they can also be a
Definitely.
pretty good experience. I guess
Yeah,
it just depends from person to person
it
and
can be
why they are using it.
fair. But with that
I'm not
depressing,
criticizing,
yeah,
computer
sure.
lounges
Sure
nor
you are.
Japanese culture. I'm just,
Okay, now it's worse.
yeah,
Now it's all right. Before this gets any darker and depressing, all right. All right, to wrap this all up, final question: do you think arcades in the future are just gonna cease to exist or change to the point where they aren't arcades that we recognize?
I feel like arcades, they're gonna have to change as time progresses in order to cater to a newer audience because the way we gamed as children is different from the way how the next generation is gaming. So in order for arcades to survive, they're just gonna have to change their image. They're gonna have to figure out a hook to stay relevant.
You're right. Like I know it was a joke, but like the VR warehouse, basically, I feel like that's the only way forward because for the near future, people probably won't be able to afford that on the mass scale. So you might as well go to the arcade to do that. But I think even nowadays, though, like say you want to play Pac-Man, right? You can buy your own arcade cabinet, load it up with Pac-Man and like whatever games you want, and play as many times as you want. So I think because of that exact reason, arcades as we know it, or retro arcades, they might just cease to exist within, I don't know. I'm gonna give very generous here, maybe like 100 years in the future, completely gone.
I feel like there will be a slow decline because there's always going to be that one community that wants the feeling of playing the original Pac-Man with the arcade. They don't want, they may have Pac-Man back home, but it's not the same.
Right.
It's not. They want, to go to the retro arcade and see the original Pac-Man themselves just for that sentimental value.
That's fair. But again, I feel like they could do that with their own arcade cabinets if they buy some at their house. But I get what you're
That
saying,
will
like
be
the
one
the
expensive hobby.
atmosphere.
Yeah.
Well, it's not that bad as a hobby.